And so our second habit of growth, fellowship. If you're allowed to have a favourite Greek word, I'm rubbish at Greek, by the way, but I do have a favourite Greek word, and that is koinonia, which is the New Testament Greek word that we translate as fellowship. I mean, sadly, I think in many British churches, many British Methodist churches, the word koinonia or fellowship has been kind of reduced to a bit of polite chit-chat over a tepid cup of tea after the service, when people either have an in-depth discussion about the hymns that you didn't choose, or who was on Strictly Come Dancing last night. But of course, biblically, the word is so much richer than that. The koinonia that we see, the fellowship that we see amongst the early Christians, particularly in Acts 2 and Acts 4, is something so very much richer and deeper than that. It's a totality of life shared, if you like, in every possible way, emotionally, spiritually, and profoundly practically. The late, great David Watson points out that actually koinonia in the early Acts narratives is expressed more clearly in the sharing of goods and resources than any other way. It's an economic thing as well as a spiritual thing. It is profoundly practical in the life of those first followers of Jesus. And I think in recent years, we've seen a renewed hunger for this way of being and living. And not only in the church, but in wider society too. Now, I apologise in advance for the next slide, and you'll see when I click on it why I make that apology. I think this is the only time in my life when I've put this man on a screen, okay? But I wanted to do so because of that day, and I'm sure it's etched deep in your memory. I can remember exactly where I was when I heard the message, "You must stay at home." Okay. And we were told categorically, and it was legally binding, that that's what we had to do. Now, we're not going to get a debate here about those who didn't quite follow that instruction, but that was what we all had to do just over 3 years ago now. Now, contrast that with the picture that Luke gives us in that idealized picture of Christian community in Acts 2, when Luke says day by day they spent much time together. And it's interesting in the Acts 2, 42 to 47 passage, how the word together recurs. There was this togetherness, this koinonia, this community. Day by day, they spent not a bit of time, but much time together. Going back to the book of beginnings, if you like, the book of Genesis, which I think is highly instructive about all manner of things, we are reminded in Genesis 2 that it's not good to be alone. As you'll see, I've slightly paraphrased that verse. As human beings, we are not designed for isolation. We are designed to be together. And in a moment, we're going to think about positively what we might be able to do, what we might be able to offer by the way of fellowship, koinonia, community, as a way of facilitating growth. But just for a moment, just to earth this in the reality of recent years, and let's stay together in plenary to do this. When that instruction came, you must stay at home, what did you miss most, and what did you notice others missing when we were quite literally forced into isolation? Just chip in. Any thoughts? Either what you missed yourself or what you noticed others missing.
Celebrations and commemorations.
Okay, thank you.
Parties, birthdays, wedding anniversaries, funerals, grieving, all those kind of coming together occasions.
Singing together.
Singing together. That's interesting, Sandra, isn't it? I remember I did a retreat weekend at Cliff. Oh, when would it have been? Late in 2020, I think, when we were allowed to gather in limited numbers, but we still weren't allowed to sing indoors. But because we were at Cliff, we went outdoors and sang in the apple orchard there, if you know it. Mm-hmm. And it was really strange hearing the singing voice again, because we'd not been able to do it. Thank you. Other things that you missed or you noticed others missing?
I think I noticed other people. I didn't have to stay at home, I should say that. I was working in a pharmacy, so
bless you.
I didn't actually have to stay home. And once I finished at the pharmacy at the end of the April, I went back to being a home carer. So I was going in and out of elderly folks' homes who were really, really missing interaction with everybody. They couldn't see their children. I was literally the only person they saw once a week.
Wow.
I think what those kind of folk missed most, particularly the single elderly folk, was just interaction. It was really noticeable how their brains slowed down and their cognitive abilities slowed down because they weren't getting interaction with humans.
Sue, thank you so much for sharing that, and God bless you, and thank you for that ministry that you exercised in both of those critical contexts. Thank you. Other things that people missed or noticed others missing?
Alison's mentioned in the chat travel and swimming.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Yes, I would like to add to that as well, especially living on an island, missing going on the mainland and seeing family and friends, and I'm a visiting preacher in the other circuit, missing that. And, you know, just being isolated on a small island, you know, by 11 miles north to south, 26 miles east to west, you know, and especially those in nursing homes that didn't see their loved ones, who couldn't see them.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Anyone else?
I think I noticed that most people were missing peace because of the constant news about people dying because of the virus. I think a lot of people miss just having peace of mind because they're always constantly worried about what they're exposing themselves to.
Well, thank you for sharing those things. Do put any other comments in the chat if you wish. We could probably spend all day on this question because it was such a profound experience in the early parts of this decade, but continues to this day. And I think actually one of the things I think that COVID did, and why it was so, and still remains actually so dangerous and so deadly, is that it actually accelerates other things that are already present. It does that physiologically, of course. I mean, a dear friend of ours died within 2 days of catching COVID because tragically she had undiagnosed leukemia, and COVID just ran amok with that and took her life within 2 days. So it was so damaging and remains so damaging physically. But I think also, truth be told, before COVID, we were already beginning to suffer with an epidemic of loneliness in this country. People craving for community contact relationships. The GPs say, don't they, that I don't know what the figure is, but it's certainly in excess of 10% of the people who come to them at the surgery have nothing wrong with them physically. They're just lonely and need somebody to talk to. So we had an epidemic of loneliness already, and COVID compounded the problem. Now, contrast that again with the rich picture of community that Luke gives us in Acts 2:42 to 47. This gentleman, who will always be a hero of mine, David Watson, says about the Acts 2 community, it's not surprising with such a community of disciples bound together in love that God added to their number day by day those who were being saved. Now, again, notice in Acts 2:42 to 47, there's no mention of preaching. There's no mention of, systematic evangelistic programs. What we have is a picture of a community living a wholesome, holy, human way of life that actually engages with people and leads them on to discover the Christ who is at the center of that community. So we have that overwhelmingly powerful picture of what good, wholesome Christian community can do in terms of healthy human living and in terms of drawing people to Christ. And again, this links to the sequence that we were thinking about before our coffee break, the bless, belong, behave, believe sequence. If for sake of argument, the habit of serving is very much located within the blessing part of this sequence, but not exclusively so, then fellowship, I think, is really at the heart of this sense of belonging. And if in these days, when, again, for whatever reason, and we could debate it all day, we live in this country in an age when very few people even know who Jesus is, if we're going to encourage people to find him for themselves, then actually here is a sequence that can be helpful. I'm going to show you a couple of little stories to illustrate that sequence and how this stage of belonging is so important. On the left is a wonderful gentleman called Alan Davis. And that's Alan spelt in the Welsh way, Alison, you'll be pleased to know, with a U, and Davis with an E. Alan was my youth fellowship leader when I was growing up. And he was a natural evangelist, although I never, ever heard him use the word evangelist or evangelism. He wasn't a preacher, but he led countless people to Jesus, including countless young people. And his primary methodology, although again, he would never ever use a word like methodology, was actually to be a welcoming person who helped people feel belong. At church, in the physical church building, he would always hang around the entrance area before a service began. And if anybody new came, he made it his personal mission that within 2 weeks of them coming to church, they would be having a meal at his home with him and his wife. And his wife, Rose, was the most fabulous cook. So they put on these incredible meals. She baked the most wonderful cakes. They just welcomed people to the home. On a Sunday evening, they welcomed all of us unruly young people to their home for our youth fellowship. And when there were too many of us to fit in their lounge, they extended their lounge so that more of us could fit in. It all began with hospitality. And yet, as I say, they drew a number I cannot count now to Christ. A number of people have gone on to have preaching ministries. A number of us went on to ordain ministries. A number of people have gone on to serve Jesus in all manner of ways in their life and their work. But if you like, it was a ministry of helping people feel they belonged. And then Alan kind of sat back and let everything else happen. The other picture on the screen, you might be wondering, what the heck is that? Well, that is my guilty secret. I have, for better or worse, for many years been involved with motorsport, and I recognise all the environmental challenges around that in these days. But when I was last in local church ministry, we were not far from Birmingham, where this photograph is taken. And this used to be one of the places that I would take to people who were on the fringes of the church just to get to know them better. And quite a few other people from church would come as well, and we'd take a big group and we'd just have a good night out together. And I always remember one guy, Derek, who had come to us with his wife, who was a Christian, but he wasn't. They'd come to us to have their children baptised. So I said to Derek, would you like to come racing with us one Saturday night? And he admitted later that he was really nervous about this because he thought once we got him in the car, we were just going to bombard him with stuff about God, Jesus, church, whatever. But I found out after he got back from this evening out, his wife asked him, well, how did it go? He said, it was brilliant. Yeah, the racing was fantastic. It was all really good and everything. And she said, but what about church? And he said, well, they never mentioned it at all. There was no mention of church or Jesus or God. Quite deliberately, we didn't talk about that at all. But next Sunday, Derek came to church because he had that sense of being blessed. He had a beginning of a sense of belonging now to this community, and a journey to faith began. But the critical part of this was just helping people to feel that they could belong, no coercion, no pressure, just warm hospitality, whether it's in Alan's home or at the stock car track, that began that journey to growth and journey to faith. So here's a question. And again, if Chris can put you into buzz groups, and hopefully we got a good 8 minutes this time. What might we learn from the likes of Alan, who just opened his heart and opened his home to people and helped them to belong? That was a first step on a journey to Jesus. And from David, who highlights the importance of the Acts 2 community being a place of hospitality and belonging, about the importance of real koinonia, real fellowship, real belonging. Welcome back, everybody. Any feedback on that? Again, about this place of belonging and hospitality and welcome, and anything coming out of your conversations?
I think we were talking about the need to be real and genuine, and
Yeah.
be yourself. And in a way, sometimes we're shy about sharing really deep things because, you know, that makes you vulnerable.
Yeah.
But then sometimes for real fellowship to happen, you have to do that. You have to be willing to do that.
Thank you. That's really helpful. A vulnerability thing. Yeah. That's a very Christ-like thing, isn't it, Sandra? I mean, Jesus, you know, made himself vulnerable, didn't he? He depended on the hospitality of others. You know, the creator of all things was dependent on somebody else giving him his lunch. Thank you.
But on the other hand, when he went to Zacchaeus's house for tea,
Yeah.
I think he probably, you know, he shared with Zacchaeus in a very deep way as well.
Yeah.
Because that changed him fundamentally.
Yeah. And interestingly, of course, that exchange happened in a home again. I mean, Alan on the screen there left, you know, his home was a place of mission. The Acts 2 model, the phrase at home, it crops up more than once. You know, our homes as missional communities. And again, in some ways, COVID forced us into thinking about that because we were confined to barracks. Actually, how are our homes places of hospitality, welcome, fellowship, you know? So, yeah, thank you. Other thoughts, please?
3 years ago at work, on my hands, really, to enjoy this hobby. I did it for about 2 or 3 years and built up a good relationship. They knew I was a Christian, and you know, they'd ask me various questions and to pray for them, you know, like for their mother or something like that, and it was really beneficial, and I really felt I belonged to that group, and it was really good. And they were disappointed when I couldn't join them for fishing.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes it's good if you've got time as a Christian to do hobbies and perhaps belong to a group. I know a Christian who does bowling and another Christian who belongs to the golf club, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Andrew, I was reminded of, for those that don't know, Andrew and I candidated together from the same circuit, quite a small circuit, and so we knew each other quite well. And certainly the church I was in and effectively grew up in, and it's only looking back you see this, was kind of working the belonging thing into its mission in exactly the way that Andrew's been talking about, because we had this huge youth fellowship which would meet a couple of times a week, and over the years it just integrated the social with the spiritual, and it just wove the two together really. So you'd meet twice a week for fellowship. Or I think, yeah, right. Twice a week for fellowship, and we'd be out at concerts. We'd meet in the town centre for tea and toast. Be about 15, 20 of us just doing that, taking all the tables in a restaurant or something. But the two were woven together, and it's clear looking back that people on the fringes, they might not have believed anything, especially young people, stroppy young people, but what they could do was hang out with people their own age and just enjoy time together, and that was the missional imperative and impact on them, really.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. And when it comes to looking at these habits of growth, or looking at holy habits more widely, obviously we tend to look at them individually, but actually in reality of life, they all get muddled up, and they all interact, and they all feed off each other. And again, I think the Lucan picture in Acts 2 is particularly powerful in that way, because we have a very holistic picture of what Christian community is about. And there's breaking bread in there, there's worship in there, there's prayer in there, there's sharing resources in there, there's serving. It's all this glorious holy mixture that leads to wholesome human life and wholesome Christian community, which are both prizes worth pursuing, I think. So thank you very much for that. Just gonna wrap up this session with quite a personal bit of thinking, because we're thinking about the habit for growth of fellowship. But as I say, I'd like to conclude this section by thinking about ourselves at this point. When I was training for ordained ministry in Durham, I was told lots of things, and 97% of it I've forgotten now. But one or two things actually remain with me. One of which was when our principal said this about ministry. He said, in ministry, you will receive lots of love from the people you receive. And we all smiled and said hallelujah, or did whatever we did at that point. But he said, there will also be moments when you feel that you've been crucified. You'll receive lots of love, but there'll be moments when you feel like you've been crucified. And, that's true. And in my ministry, there have been those moments, some really deep and difficult moments. You may have seen the animated film Moses, Prince of Egypt, that this picture represents. And I always remember the scene in that film when Moses goes out into the Red Sea with his staff, having been told by God to go there, hoping, if not expecting, for the sea to part and the Israelites to be able to escape. And that picture has always stayed with me, because it reminds me that sometimes leadership can be an incredibly lonely business. Moses going out there desperately, hoping, longing, and praying that what he believes to be true will happen. Because it doesn't, at worst case, he's going to look extremely foolish. Sorry, at best case, he's going to look extremely foolish. And at worst case, he's going to drown. So really, he's out there depending on God and God alone in that place of loneliness. And again, in life and in ministry, we may well have experienced such moments when we felt like that. Now, to go back to the Genesis text that we mentioned earlier, it is not good to be alone. Some time ago, I was talking with a minister friend who was going through a tough time in their ministry, in their context. And I said to them, who have you got to pray for you about this? Who have you got that you can talk to about this confidentially and personally? And the pause in their response was telling, because actually they had nobody to turn to. Nobody they could think of who they could phone up or go and see, who could talk with them, listen to them, as we were thinking earlier about the importance of listening, pray for them. And that concerned me. And then we had a conversation then about building a community of support for that friend. So if it's not good to be alone, if actually sharing deeply with others is what we've been created to be and to do, the question is, with whom do you share fellowship in a way that sustains you in your ministry, whatever that be? And we have ordained folk with us, we have people training for ordained ministry, we have local preachers, we have lay pastors, we have people working in the community, we have folk here doing different day jobs that's part of their ministry as well. So when you think ministry, think widely about that, however that word applies to you. But the question is, with whom do you share fellowship that sustains you in ministry? I'm going to invite you to go back to your small groups to discuss this. Again, please note what we said earlier about maintaining confidentiality. Please be helpful to each other, because your answer, like my friends, might be, well, I haven't got anybody. So you might want to tease that out together about how that might be addressed. So a little bit of time to conclude this session. How do we, or with whom do we share fellowship? And if we don't, how might we establish a community around us that will keep us going? Thank you. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for sharing in that conversation. I hope you found that to be helpful. I think in leadership in particular, it can be a very, very lonely place. So please, if this has spoken to you in particular this morning, this bit, please be good to yourself and find those trusted confidants with whom you can share, if that is something that you do need. It was such a hallmark of the early community, that they gave to anybody as they had need. And I don't think that was just about physical provision. I think it was about emotional and prayerful support as well. So thank you. That's the end of session 2. We're going to have another 10-minute break now. And if we could come back at 11:45, and we will think about breaking bread.